Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to go over the regional knockouts for the June Joust qualifiers, which took place on Sunday. So they've already passed, of course. So let's take a look back at this past Sunday, talk about the matches and my takeaways from it. Of course, there are two different regions. There's the Western region, which is the North American region, and the Eastern region, which is the Asian region. And it was quite a weekend. So I will, real quick, before we get into it, show you the bracket. This is not the final bracket. This is the bracket just as we went into the weekend, and we will talk about it more as we go along. I'll show you the final bracket at the end, just so you understand when we get there. As you can see, in North America, we had the Dallas Fuel and Houston Outlaws taking on each other in the first round. That is the matchup of the 5-seeded Fuel and the 4-seeded Outlaws. Winner of that series was going to take on the number 1-seeded LA Gladiators, and the 3-seeded Atlanta Reign taking on the 6-seeded Boston Uprising, with the winner of that series going on to take on the San Francisco Shock. Then in the APAC region, you had the number 4-seeded NYXL taking on the number 1-seeded Hangzhou Spark, and the number 2-seeded Shanghai Dragons taking on the number 3-seeded Seoul Dynasty. We're going to start by talking about this APAC bracket first. I'm going to start with that first match there, the NYXL taking on the Hangzhou Spark. Now, if you caught my video that I made yesterday, or if you watched the matches this past weekend, you would know that the NYXL had quite the weekend leading up to this Sunday matchup against the Hangzhou Spark. The New York Excelsior finished 2-2 with a +1 differential. Of course, they finished their matches last week, so they didn't play this past weekend until Sunday. And so really their fate was not in their own hands at that point in time. They needed things to go their way. Philadelphia had a very realistic shot at passing them in differential. The NYXL would not be able to make it if the Fusion did that, most likely. A lot of things could have gone their way or could have not gone their way, but in the end, the Valiant taking a map off the Fusion gives the NYXL a path into the June Joust regional knockouts, and they take that opportunity and go up against the 4-0 Hangzhou Spark. And this series was quite an interesting one. Now, you all know, if you've been watching this channel for long enough, that I am a fan of the New York Excelsior, but I did not go into this series as a fan with very high expectations. I had the hopium fueling me all day on Saturday, but I didn't expect much going into Sunday. And, well, the NYXL, they surprised me. They came out looking pretty good. They decided to run a lot of Arisa Diva compositions. I think that's the thing they ran the entire series, if I remember correctly. Map 1 didn't go their way. The Hangzhou Spark, who opted to run the Winston compositions pretty much the entire series. Winston Diva, I believe, mostly. I don't think they're in much double bubble. Hi, this is me putting this in while I'm editing this video. I want to make a quick interjection here and say that I had a very major brain fart while recording the video because the Hangzhou Spark ran actually a ton of double bubble. That is basically what they ran the entire series. The NYXL ran pretty much Arisa Zarya most of the series, with occasional instances of running double shield and the Arisa Diva. So I had a brain fart. I totally dropped the ball on this part and forgot. But yes, Hangzhou Spark ran a lot of double bubble. Most of the points that I make the rest of this video still stand and still make sense, but I did want to say that I did make a bit of a boo-boo and make a bit of a mistake, and I want to make sure that I make sure to clear that up. But they were running basically this Winston composition, running the Reaper Echo. It was a very interesting composition, and it's a composition that we've kind of seen a lot of people in different places in this June Joust qualifiers running. And on control, where really you just need to be aggressive and kind of control tempo and be a lot more fast-moving, aggressive style of play, that composition rolled over the NYXL. But as they moved into your assaults, your escorts, your hybrids, the NYXL's composition worked a lot better. Friday and Jonak played very, very well. Friday's Brig looked very good. Jonak's BAP looked very good. I thought Yakpung and Bianca looked very good. They looked like they were playing well together. And, of course, Flora popped off. Flora has been having such a great season. He is definitely the bright spot at the current moment for this NYXL roster. Very interesting compositions from them. They end up pulling off the upset 3-1 over the Hangzhou Spark, and I think it was a huge, huge, huge surprise and a huge boost to a team that people have been pretty high on. You know, there's been members of the community that have been talking very highly about the NYXL Scrimbucks, and their preseason kind of ranking was very, very high, and they didn't really seem to be hitting those expectations, but going into this match, they ended up doing what they needed to do, and they got the win. I think, a little spoiler, I won't spoil who makes it, but of all the teams that ended up making the June Joust regional, or June Joust, I guess, tournament itself, the top four, New York, in my opinion, is the weakest of the four. I thought that New York getting the ability to go up against Hangzhou as the 4 seed up against the 1 seed was the best possible route for New York to get in, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are the best team, going into this tournament. I think it is a very tough out for them to find success in this tournament overall. I think they have the weakest overall roster of the teams that have made it. I especially think that their tank line is a problem, potentially, but if they play the way that we saw them play against the Hangzhou Spark, I think they could find some success up against some other teams. So we'll see what happens, but I was very impressed by them. I thought they played their compositions well. I thought they played around the Sparks' aggression very well, and they have managed, or they became the first team to lock up a spot in the June Joust. The other APAC game was the Seoul Dynasty losing to Lee Jae-gon. It was the Lee Jae-gon show all night in this Shanghai vs. Seoul series. It wasn't even close. It was a 3-0 clean sweep for the Dragons. Lee Jong Tower was absurd, or should I say Lee Jae-gon Tower was absurd. Lee Jae-gon set a record for most amount of environmental kills in a match with 10. He also set the record for the most amount of environmental kills on a single map, also with 10 on Lee Jae-gon Tower. It was not close. And to me, that is very, very, very positive for Shanghai. Shanghai is a team that looks like they are just getting better and better and better and better. Yes, they lost to the Hangzhou Spark at the earlier days of this June Joust qualifying run, but it didn't really seem to stop them very much. They've been rolling. Teams have been playing recently. They are a threat. I think that you should look at them as arguably the favorite going into this tournament. There's some other teams that look pretty good, and I think that it is a very realistic possibility that the Dragons don't win the whole thing. It's tough to be the top team, but they look to be a dominant force right now. They look to be pretty good. They have been opting to run a lot of those Winston compositions that we've seen teams like the Spark run, and we get to North America, teams like the Dallas Fuel have liked to run those compositions a lot. So I'm intrigued to see how Shanghai matches up with some of these other NA teams. And I think they will have a very tough run. Because I think that some of the teams that made it in NA will challenge the way that they play. I want to see if they adapt at all, because I don't believe they were playing a ton of the Lucio Moira, which we've seen everywhere in NA. In NA, that was the comp. It was such a strong composition. It did very, very well. It was far and away the composition that dominated NA for the entirety of this June Joust qualifying circuit. And so, or maybe not the entirety of it, at least the last couple of weeks, it was the main thing that we saw. So I'm interested to see what the Shanghai Dragons are able to do going forward, when I think that they are going to have to adapt to running some different compositions than what we've seen them running recently, just because of the nature of the meta. And it'll be interesting to see. I think every team that made this tournament has a different style of play. I think of a similar double shield style of composition that you'll see from Shanghai. At a lot of the time, they like to run, but they also are comfortable running those Winston compositions when they need to. Whereas a team like New York doesn't want to run that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. These two teams really interest me because to me they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. Like Shanghai Dragons look to be this really dominant force. Like they can run pretty much anything and look good on it. The NYXL, I feel like they really are a team that you only want to see them run double shield right now because that's what Yakpeng has looked the best on so far. They looked really good. They have an extra week to prepare, and that may help them a lot. But I also wouldn't be surprised if New York just lose 6 maps in a row and are eliminated. It's that type of level where you expect greatness from Shanghai, but New York is just kind of like, hey, the fact that you've made it this far is already impressive enough. If you can get a single point from this tournament, it's a huge success. So that's APAC, NYXL, Shanghai Dragons, move on. We'll see what happens there in the coming week. But let's move on to NA, where we had a very, very interesting bracket run. So I'm going to start by doing this one just in kind of order of the legs of the brackets. We'll start with the top part of this bracket, which was the Dallas Fuel taking on the Houston Outlaws, and then the winner going on to face the LA Gladiators. And the winner in the Dallas Fuel Houston Outlaws game was not much of a surprise. It was the Dallas Fuel in pretty dominant fashion. It was a 3-0. I think the Houston Outlaws took 3 points throughout the entire series. It was a 3-mapper, so I guess not that surprising. And there's a lot of comments and stuff that people have had directed towards the Houston Outlaws based on the way that they played and the way that the match went. And a lot of people, I think, don't understand necessarily what went on. And I obviously don't know the full extent of it myself. I'm not in the team's practices, and I wasn't in the team discussion during the match. But to me, what it seemed like was the Houston Outlaws did not have the same read on the meta that a lot of other teams did. I think that they really wanted to try to run compositions that they felt were defensive enough to stop the aggression that you had coming from the Dallas Fuel. But the composition they were in wasn't the same thing that you would have seen a team like New York run, right? New York and Houston had very similar compositions, but there were key differences that I think ultimately made the difference. And also, they were not playing against the exact same compositions. Obviously, the Hangzhou Spark were running different supports a lot. They weren't really running the Moira. They were running stuff like Ana or Baptiste, whereas the Dallas Fuel were running a ton of Moira. And the Houston Outlaws opted not to put Dante on the Echo, which I think was the big criticism a lot of people had for the way they played it. And then when they tried to run the mirror match against the Dallas Fuel, they opted to go with the Brig instead of the Lucio, which I think was an interesting decision. But I don't blame the players for those decisions. That's obviously a coaching decision. And at the end of the day, some coaches don't have the same read on the meta that others do, and that is perfectly normal, and that is perfectly okay. And I just think the Dallas Fuel have just really figured out how to master play styles. They may not play the most ideal composition every single week. They may not play the most ideal composition every single meta, but they are so good at what they do that it doesn't matter. They know that they have weaknesses. They know that Fearless is not a great Orisa. He doesn't want to play the Orisa if he doesn't have to. They know that the key to victory for them is put Fearless on the Winston. Maybe when the Countdown Cup comes around and hero pools change up, maybe we see Winston get banned. And in a tournament like that, I think that Dallas Fuel may have more issues. But right now, as long as Winston is available, they will find ways to make it work. And they are just that good and that talented that no matter what they do, so far it seems like they pretty much are guaranteed to find success. And I think that the Houston Outlaws are a good team, but I just think that they just had nothing to really match the aggression that the Fuel were able to bring. Now, when the Fuel go up against the LA Gladiators, that was a different story. The Gladiators are a very adaptable team. The Houston Outlaws' problem was that they did not adapt very much. They played the same compositions. You know, the first 2 maps was one composition. The third map, they tried a different composition, and it didn't work. But they weren't doing hero swaps throughout the series, right? Like, on the map, they stayed basically on the same heroes. The Gladiators made some changes. They made some hero swaps. They made some player swaps. They put Mirror in for the last 2 maps. It was a 3-1 map score for this series, with the Dallas Fuel ultimately once again punching in a ticket to Hawaii. taking the victory over the Gladiators, but this was a closer series. I thought the Gladiators played well. They pushed them. They challenged them. It wasn't a walk in the park with the Fuel. Every map was one that the Gladiators challenged them. You know, the first map, the control map, which I believe was Oasis. It was very, very close. It was back and forth. It was a 2-1 match score. I think Assault was pretty close. It was a very good series. So the LA Gladiators looked good. But I think it is the same type of thing of just the Dallas Fuel play with a level of aggression, and they have an understanding of this meta and the way these heroes synergize together, and they just are so talented that they have just they know how to just get the edge in every single big moment. Much like the San Francisco Shock of 2019 and 2020. You find yourself in a moment where you might be struggling, where you might have a weakness. There's something that just might be enough to eliminate you, or might be enough to kind of take advantage of. The Fuel will find it, and they will feast on it, and you give them an inch, and they will take a mile. That is just what the Dallas Fuel are able to do. They look like that dominant of a team. They look like that strong of a team. And so, well, the Gladiators, I thought, looked good. And I thought Birdring played really well. I thought Kevster played well. I thought Mirror even played well. This is just a team in the Dallas Fuel that are just so strong and so prepared and so well equipped to handle pretty much any challenge that is thrown their way, that they are just going to continue to be a dominant force so long as they can keep players on some of their best hero picks. And that is exactly what we saw from them in this series. I'm a huge fan of what the Fuel have been able to do. I personally don't like seeing teams find tons and tons and tons of success week in and week out. But it has been quite the run so far for the Dallas Fuel this season. So let's go to the final series of the weekend. The first match was the Atlanta Reign taking on the Boston Uprising. Atlanta Reign take this one 3-0 in pretty dominant fashion. The Atlanta Reign looked very good in this meta. Looked very good in a lot of these compositions that they ran, including the Winston compositions, the Moira, Lucio, Neo Goats, Dupla Goats, whatever you want to call it, composition that we see the Dallas Fuel running at a very high level. The Atlanta Reign looked very good on that composition as well, which is something that a lot of people are surprised by, myself included, because for a long time the biggest criticism of the Atlanta Reign was that this was a one-trick team. They could only run Rush. They could only run the Reinhardt, and they could run some Orisa as well, but they only looked good on Reinhardt. That's all they could run. In both control maps that they played, one against Boston, then, of course, one against San Francisco, they ran the Winston, Neo Goats type compositions and looked really good on it. And I think that there's a very clear and noticeable improvement from this Atlanta Reign team, even from the May Melee to the June Joust. I think Gator and Hawk look so much better. Gator, in particular, just looks incredible this season. He has looked so good, and I think that that is a huge, huge credit to, obviously, Gator putting in the work, but also the coaching staff. The addition of Unter, I think, really has done a lot to boost this Atlanta Reign team up to the point where they can go up against a pretty good Boston Uprising team. They can put themselves in a composition that you wouldn't traditionally associate with the Reign, and they just dominate it. And they go up against the Shock and keep that momentum going, even against Smurf, who is one of the best Winstons in the league. The Atlanta Reign just outclassed them. Pelican has arguably the best Echo in the league, one of the best Echoes at the very least, and they just were too much for the Shock to handle. And I think it was a very good showing from the Atlanta Reign this entire slate of matches that they had, because they really showed that they are a more versatile team than we give them a lot of credit for. And this is the Atlanta Reign that I think, obviously Atlanta Reign fans wanted to see, but even me, like someone who's been skeptical of this team, who saw so much potential in this team because this DPS trio of Kai and Edison and Pelican is so strong and so great. And I think Iris is a fantastic player. I've always thought very highly of Masa. I looked at this team and I said, this tank line is the thing that's holding this team back if they can't adapt, if they can't improve. And my lord, has Gator just leveled up. Has Hawk just leveled up. I mean, they have become some of the best tanks in the league. They're one of the best tank duos in the league. And so I look at this team, and I think that realistically, right, they love these Orisa compositions. I've talked about this in the past. I think that that is arguably the best type of composition for the Atlanta Reign. Rush is good for them, but so few teams, I think, run double shield, or in this case, I think with Orisa Diva, as well as the Reign do. And when they can just let Iris just frag on the Batiste, they look really, really good. And so to me, the Atlanta Reign are certainly one of my favorites to make an impact. I actually think the Atlanta Reign have a very good chance to make a high impact against some of these teams that want to run these Winston compositions. Because though we've seen the Dallas Fuel dominate against these compositions in the past, right? Houston tried to run them, it didn't work. The Gladiators tried to run them at times, though they opted to go for the mirror quite a bit as well. Didn't really work. The Reign faced it with the Shock and just completely dismantled it. And when the Shock tried to run double shield, the Reign dismantled that as well. And so I really do think that this Reign team has a lot of potential when just you have DPS players that are just constantly having an impact. You have Kai, whose aim is absolutely one of the best in the league. Pelican's Echo has been really, really good. Iris is basically another DPS player. It was super impressive from the Reign. I feel very good about them going into this June Joust. So here's a look at the bracket that we saw. These are the teams that have advanced. Of course, from North America, the Dallas Fuel and the Atlanta Reign. From the APAC region, the NYXL and the Shanghai Dragons. There's a lot of questions that this tournament will have to answer for us all. How good are the Atlanta Reign truly? How good are the NYXL truly? Will Shanghai get their revenge on the Dallas Fuel, or are the Dallas Fuel going to continue their dominance and rival the San Francisco Shock for being the best roster, potentially in Overwatch League history? Even if it's only been one season, they could have what it takes to become the greatest team that we've ever seen if they're able to keep this streak up for an entire season, pretty much. There's a lot of things, like I said, that will be answered, a lot of questions, but there's also obviously the topic about this kind of idea that the 4-0 teams that we've seen in both tournament cycles have all lost. They've all lost. And it's been interesting to say the least. The Gladiators 4-0, they lost. Shock 4-0, they lost. Spark 4-0, they lost. You go back to the May Melee, the Fusion, the Outlaws, the Justice, all 4-0, all lost. And I've seen a lot of people talking about it and a lot of things about kind of what it means, whether or not it's something that we should be concerned about. So I do want to talk about this more, and I'm going to dedicate an entire video to it on Friday. I'm going to talk about this idea of the 4-0 teams losing a lot, whether or not it is a major coincidence, if there's a pattern we should be looking for, if this is a trend that continues, what my thoughts on this whole thing are. So that'll be the video for Friday because I think it is interesting. I've seen a lot of comments about it, a lot of people talking about it on social media, so I figured I would talk about it in its own video. So be on the lookout for that on Friday, but tomorrow, of course, will be my bracket prediction, so we will see how wrong I am about that when we get there, and that'll be a good time. But that is all for me for today. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing for more like it in the future. Comment down below your thoughts on what happened this past weekend. And if you're excited to see some of these teams get a chance at a tournament victory. But that is all from me once again. So I hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.